The afternoon sun in Ibadan burned hot and mercilessly over the small, overcrowded compound on Honorek Street. Chickens scratched the dust near a crumbling wall, and the air smelled of old stew and soapy water. Inside one of the apartments, the sound of a woman shouting ripped through the tiny space. "Who touched this meat?" Mama Tay's voice shook the walls. She stood over a bubbling pot in the corner kitchen, her wrapper tied tightly around her chest, her face glistening with sweat and fury. A scrawny girl stood at the sink, hands soaked with dish soap, her head low. Her name was Zina, thin as a broomstick, skin dry from harsh soaps, eyes wide and always alert like a hunted animal. She was only 13. I said, "Who touched this meat?" Mama Tay shouted again, lifting the lid to show 2 lonely chunks swimming in pepper soup. "I didn't touch it, Ma," Zina whispered. Her voice cracked from thirst and fear. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Her stomach gnawed at itself. "You're lying, Omo Irankarin?" The woman screamed, her palm flying across Zina's face before the girl could blink. The slap echoed. Zina staggered, tears springing to her eyes, but she didn't cry. Crying only made it worse. She swallowed hard and wiped her face with her bare arm. "You think we brought you here to feed you free food?" Mama Tay snarled. "You eat behind our backs now, after everything we've done for you." Zina wanted to shout the truth, that she hadn't eaten meat in weeks, that she washed all the clothes, cleaned the toilets, fetched water, but barely got 2 slices of yam in return. She wanted to say they didn't adopt her out of kindness, but because it made them look generous in church. But she stayed silent. From the sitting room, the children and behind. Mama Tay's twins peeked around the corner, watching. Quietly, they were barely 5. Unlike Zina, they were plump and glowing with care. Then came the verdict. Papa Tay, a short man with a potbelly and loud slippers, walked into the room. "She must go," he said simply, rubbing his eyes as if this was just another chore. "Go where?" Zina croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Back to where we picked you from," Mama Tay spat. "We don't owe you anything." I don't have anywhere to go," Zina whispered. "You think this is your real home?" the woman barked. "We did you a favor, taking you from that orphanage. Now God has given us our own children. We don't need you." Tay and Kihin stared, confused as their father opened the door wide. "Leave now." Zina stood frozen, eyes darting from the doorway to the woman's hand still gripping a spoon. "Out." Papa Tay barked. Mama Tay yanked her forward and shoved her outside. The door slammed. A bolt clicked. Zina stood barefoot in the dust, wearing a worn-out yellow dress that hung off her bony shoulders. She had no bag, no shoes, not even a piece of bread. The slap still stung her face. Her hands trembled. She stood there for a while, blinking into the sunlight, trying to understand what had just happened. She was now homeless. Neighbors peeked through curtains but said nothing. No one wanted to get involved. No one ever did. Zina turned slowly and began walking. The streets of Ibadan, the street roared with lifeakatas racing past, hawkers shouting, radios blaring from open shops. But Zina felt invisible. She walked past roasted plantain sellers, the smell making her stomach churn. A small boy dropped a plastic bottle near her foot and laughed. Zina bent to pick it up, not to drink, but out of habit, she wandered toward the local market. Behind a pile of tomato crates, she found a spot and curled up. The ground was cold, her lips cracked, her eyes burned. The last proper meal she had was 2 days ago. She closed her eyes and whispered, "God, why did you make me?" The sky answered. With silence at midnight, a woman sweeping near the stalls spotted her and screamed, "Yee, who is that? Thief! Thief!" Zina jumped up and ran, heart pounding, legs barely carrying her. Her foot scraped something sharp. She didn't stop. A stranger's kindness hours later, she stumbled near a welding shop. A group of boys sat by a fire of burning tires. One of them whistled. "Hey, small girl," he called. "Come here, we'll give you food." Zina's blood went cold. Another boy stood and began walking toward her. She bolted again, this time diving behind a pile of trash cans and curling up between 2 smelly plastic buckets. Her body shivered uncontrollably. She was 13, alone. No home. No name beyond what the orphanage gave her. Memories in the dark that night. A dream came. A woman, face blurred by shadows, stood near a river, crying softly. "Where is she?" The woman kept whispering, "Where is my baby?" Zina reached out in the dream, but her hands couldn't touch her. Her voice wouldn't work. Then the woman turned, and for a split second, her face looked like Zina's. She woke up gasping. Tears poured silently. Was that her mother? No, she thought. That's not possible. The only name she had ever known was Zina. The orphanage gave her that. She didn't even know her real birthday. The next morning at dawn, she approached a kiosk and begged for water. The woman behind the counter hissed, "Dirty girl, go and look for your parents." Zina didn't respond. She moved on by noon. Her legs gave out. She sat on a stone bench near the highway, staring at the sky. Her belly felt like it had collapsed inward. A child approached her with half a biscuit. "Auntie," he said, "eat this." Zina took it like gold. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have a home?" he asked. "No," she said. The boy nodded sadly. "Street is hard, but don't die, okay?" Zina didn't promise. She wasn't sure if she could keep that promise. One decision that night. Under a leaking umbrella shed, Zina whispered to herself, "Maybe I should go back. Back to where they found me, the orphanage." Her voice cracked. With the weight of the idea, maybe they'd let her stay, just for one night, just to eat, just to feel human again. She didn't know the way, but she remembered the name, House of Mercy Orphanage. Her journey to the truth had just begun. But at that same moment, miles away in Abuja, in a bedroom draped in gold and marble, the First Lady of Nigeria, Madame Omolara Adebayo, stood staring at the same sky, haunted by a child she once left behind. Neither of them knew, ... They were closer than ever. The sun hadn't yet risen in Abuja, but the presidential villa was already buzzing with movement. Uniformed aides moved silently through marble corridors. In one corner of the vast estate, behind closed doors adorned with golden embroidery, First Lady Omolara Adebayo sat in silence. She hadn't slept. Again, she was dressed in a soft blue satin wrapper, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf. The room was dimly lit, but her eyes stared at nothing. A cup of untouched tea sat on the side table. Her fingers clutched a wrinkled hospital report like it was her last breath. Normal. That word mocked her again from the paper. Everything appears medically normal. No identifiable cause of infertility. Normal. Normal but childless. Normal but for 10 long years of her marriage to Nigeria's president. She had fasted. She had spent nights in cold hospital rooms in Paris and Jerusalem, hoping some foreign miracle would fix what no doctor could explain. Worst of all, the guilt she thought she had buried kept scratching at the door of her heart. A knock broke the silence. She didn't answer. The door opened slightly. "Ma," came the soft voice of F, her personal aide. A kind young woman with careful eyes. "You've not eaten since yesterday. Please, ... something small." Omolara finally looked at her. "What do you want me to say, that I'm broken?" "No," F said quietly. "Just don't pretend you aren't hurting." Omolara's fingers tightened around the report. "F," she whispered. "Do you believe in punishment?" "Punishment?" The girl blinked. "Yes. Like, maybe God let your womb stay empty because you did something wrong." F didn't speak for a moment. "I don't believe that's the kind of God we serve, Ma." Omolara closed her eyes, but she didn't believe it. And no matter how far she rose in power or status, the ghost always followed. Flashback, age 17, she was young. So young, barely 17. Just left for Lagos to hustle. He never even came back to see the baby. Her aunt, who raised her, wept in shame. The neighbors whispered, she was a disgrace, a stain, a girl with no home training. When the baby came, she wrapped her in a blue shawl. No letter, just a cheap plastic bracelet she bought from the market. It had tiny white beads spelling hope. She left the baby at the gates of House of Mercy. Then she buried the memory. She told her future husband years later that the baby hadn't survived a lie, and now in her middle age, did something she had resisted for years. She visited Prophet Ike, a controversial but respected preacher known for speaking hard truths. He greeted her warmly, with no cameras, no press, no aides, just a small wooden room and the scent of incense. "I can't have children," she said quietly, sitting before him. "Speak." He only looked into a shallow bowl of water on his table. After a long silence, he said, "Your womb remembers what your mouth forgot." Omolara frowned. "What does that mean? You gave birth once? Did you not?" She froze, her heart thundered. How ... How did you? "You left her at the gate of an orphanage. You did not kill her, but you abandoned her, and that pained her. Pain cries out." Omolara covered her face, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what to do. I was just a girl." The prophet nodded gently. "That child lives, but her soul is wounded. Her tears speak daily. Until that wound is healed, your womb will remain closed." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "What do I do? But to ask for her forgiveness? But I don't even know her name," she whispered. "She knows yours. Her spirit knows. She's looking for you too." That night, in the villa, President Folklore Adebayo came home late, briefcase in hand, phone pressed to his ear. When he entered their private sitting room, he found Omolara staring at the wall again. "You okay?" he asked, placing the phone on silent. She nodded. Slowly, then she said something he never expected to hear. "I had a baby before we married." Silence. He sat down slowly. You told me she died." I lied. She explained everything. Pregnancy, the shame, the orphanage, the bracelet. "She's out there," Omalera whispered. "And I think, she's suffering." After a long silence, he said, "Then we'll find her." The next morning, the news hit the nation like a thunderclap. 800 million reward for long-lost daughter. The headlines screamed, TV anchors on channels TV8. And TVC blinked at the cameras in disbelief as they repeated the official statement released by the Office of the First Lady *, 22 years ago. A baby girl was abandoned outside House of Mercy Orphanage. No name, no known only. A beaded bracelet with the word hope. The woman who left her is now seeking forgiveness and reunion. A reward will be given to anyone who provides verifiable information about the child's whereabouts. The announcement lit Nigeria on fire. On the streets of Mush, Zina stood in the shadow of a Danfo bus at Oyulegba, under bridge, trying to sell small sachets of water. Her eyes were sunken, her lips cracked. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. "Pure water, 20, she shouted, holding up the sachets. A man in a leather cap hissed, "Small girl, go carry book." "Why, you dayhawk?" Zina didn't respond. She had long stopped answering insults, but her legs felt like jelly. Her arms ached. Every few steps, black spots danced before her eyes. She sat near a pole under the harsh sun, pressing a hand to her head. And that's when she noticed people gathered around a small TV, hanging from a barbershop wall. The First Lady's face was on the screen. Zina squinted at it. The woman looked sad. So sad. Not like a powerful person at all, she was saying. Something Zina couldn't hear the volume clearly. But then a subtitle flashed at the bottom of the screen. "I'm searching for my daughter. Please help me find her. I left her 22 years ago with only hope." Zina's heart skipped. Hope. A whisper stirred in her mind. That name again? Hope. Meanwhile, at the presidential villa, the Situation Room was packed. DSS officers, State House, aides, and President Adebayo himself sat around a long table. Director Yakubu, head of intelligence, clicked through slides on a projector. "We've received over 5,000 tips in the last 24 hours. Everyone wants the reward. We've set up a 24/7 hotline and deployed a forensic team to analyze credible claims. So far, any match to the orphanage record?" The president interrupted. Director Yakubu hesitated. "That's the problem, sir. The orphanage's 2002 records were mostly destroyed in a fire 10 years ago. All we have are a few smudged handwritten notes. We did find an entry, one name, Zina, no surname, no birthday. Adopted by a Sunday and Kikolomo Olenroju from Mushin." Omo sat forward sharply. "Did they leave any forwarding address?" "No, ma, but one of the orphanage nurses who worked back then is alive. She remembers the baby with the hope bracelet." Omalara's eyes watered. "Then find that family," the president said. "Find the girl they adopted." A dangerous encounter back in Mushin. Zina tried to sleep behind an empty market stall. Her body was weak, her lips dry, her legs bore blisters. From walking barefoot, she was drifting into half-sleep when a voice startled her. "Hey, small girl." She jumped up. A group of area boys, about 4 of them, were closing in. They wore torn jeans, smelled of cheap alcohol and smoke. "Where you dey go?" one said, grabbing her arm. I just want to sleep. She dey fine like this. Weddin, you say your name, B?" Zina didn't answer. She yanked her arm, but they held tight. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "Oye, leave, am alone." It was an older woman, tall, fierce-looking, with tribal marks and a wrapper tied across her chest. A known food seller called Mama Ao. The boys cursed and retreated. Zina collapsed into the woman's arms. "God punish them," the woman muttered. "Small girl like you, this street no be for you." "Where's your home?" Zina shook her head. "No home," Mama Ao sighed. "Come, you go. Help me tomorrow, washpot. I give you food and place to sleep, but just one night. I know day run orphanage. The connection grows at the villa." Omalera sat with DSS agents reviewing photos. She pointed at one blurry image of a street girl sitting near Oyulegba with water sachets. Her heart thumped. "There's something about her." "We'll check it," Director Yakubo said. "We're triangulating tips with public CCTV. She may be the one." Angela, Omalara's aide, entered with a brown envelope. "Ma, the nurse we contacted sent a note. She says the baby with the hope bracelet had a distinct birthmark, right arm shaped like a bent leaf." Omalera gasped. She rolled up her own sleeve. A similar birthmark sat on her upper arm, bent like a comma. Her family said it ran in the bloodline. Her husband placed his hand gently over hers. "We're getting close." Zina stood in front of the faded yellow gate, her hands trembling as she knocked. The paint on the orphanage sign had peeled. The words, "House of Mercy, every child deserves love," barely visible beneath years of sun and dust. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, but it wasn't hunger that made her legs weak. It was hope. This place was the only memory she had ever been told about. "You came from here," Mamate once said dismissively, as if it was a cursed place. But to Zina, it was the closest thing to a beginning, and she had come back not expecting miracles, only a safe floor to sleep on. The small gate window creaked open. A tired-looking matron peeked out, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" she barked, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Zina pressed her hands together. "Please, Ma, I was adopted from here when I was small. I don't have anywhere to stay." The woman stared, unimpressed. "How old are you?" 13, Zina replied. The matron scoffed and began to close the window. "We only take children 10 and below. Government rules." Zina's voice cracked. "Please, I can sweep, clean, anything. I just need a place to sleep." The woman's face hardened. "Go back to wherever you came from. We're not a hotel." And with that, the window slammed shut. Zina stood there for a moment, stunned. She knocked again, more desperately this time, her fists weak from fatigue. "Please, I'll sleep outside. Just don't send me away." But no answer came. She dropped to her knees at the gate, her cheek resting against the hot metal. Her chest heaved silently. In her mind, she whispered the name again. Hope. It didn't sound like her, but it had always followed her in dreams. On the other side of town, the presidential convoy was preparing for movement. Omolara Adebayo stood in her private dressing room, staring at her reflection as a makeup artist touched up her cheeks. But her eyes weren't focused on the mirror. They were distant. "I want to go there," she said suddenly. "To the orphanage. Myself." Angela turned from the doorway. "Today, Ma?" "Yes," Omolara said, her voice firmer. "I need to see the place where I left her. I don't care about cameras or protocol. I just... need to stand there." By late morning, a black SUV convoy was weaving its way through the crowded streets of Mushin. Word spread quickly. "The First Lady is coming," some shouted. Children ran ahead barefoot, waving sticks and plastic flags. The orphanage staff scrambled to sweep the compound, tie headscarves properly, and line up the younger children in fresh uniforms. Someone fetched a faded banner that read, "Welcome, Mama of the Nation," left over from a donation event 3 years ago. But outside the gate, none of that mattered to Zina. She had fallen asleep. Her body curled against the wall, hands wrapped around her knees. Her lips were dry. Her face was pale. She didn't even hear the sirens as the convoy approached. The black SUVs stopped just outside the compound. Security officers stepped out first, scanning the area. Omolara stepped out gracefully, dressed in a white-laced gown and headwrap. Her eyes immediately scanned the crowd. She smiled politely at the staff, at the cameras, at the children lining up. But then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, her gaze landed on the girl sleeping on the ground by the gate. She stopped walking. "Who is that?" she whispered to Angela. Angela blinked, trying to see through the dust. "I don't know, Ma. A street child." But Omolara was already moving forward. Cameras followed in confusion as she knelt in front of the girl's sweetheart. She said gently. Zina stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. She gasped and sat up suddenly, dazed. "What's your name?" Omolara asked, her voice trembling. "Zina." The girl replied, unsure if this was real. "Where are your parents?" the woman asked softly. "I don't have any," Zina said, blinking fast. Omolara glanced back at the matron. "You turned her away." The matron hesitated. "She's over. 10, government policy." "I don't care about policy," Omolara said firmly, eyes still on the girl. This one, this one is coming with me." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Zina blinked again. You want me to come with you?" Omolara took off her scarf and wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders. "Yes, come with me, my dear. You're not going to sleep on any street again." Zina stood slowly, unsteady. Her small fingers clutched the silk scarf like it was the only thing holding her to this world. She followed the First Lady into the waiting SUV, unsure whether she was awake or dreaming. As the convoy drove off, people on the street pointed and murmured, but inside the car, silence sat between them. Omolara watched the girl closely. There was something in her face, something familiar. Not just pity-recognition back at the villa. President Folklore Adebayo was waiting in the lounge when the convoy returned. He stood slowly as his wife stepped out, followed by a thin girl with wide eyes. "This is her," Omolara whispered. "Are you sure?" he asked, barely breathing. "I don't know yet," she replied, "but I feel it. I feel it in my soul." Zina was taken to a guest room and given food, water, and a warm bath. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls, unsure what to do. The blanket on her lap was softer than anything she had ever touched. In the hallway, Angela approached Omalera with a thin file. "Ma," she said carefully, "we contacted the orphanage. There's a single handwritten record of a girl named Zina, adopted 13 years ago by a Sunday in Kikalomo Olanra Waju. No surname, no birth certificate, and the nurse on shift. That day remembered the baby, because she came with a beaded bracelet." Omalara's hand flew to her chest. "Hope," she whispered. "Yes, Ma." In the privacy of her bedroom that night, Omalera opened a small drawer and pulled out something she hadn't touched in over 20 years. A tiny broken bracelet. The word hope still readable in faded white beads. She pressed it to her lips. Could it really be? Could the child she abandoned now be asleep in the next room? The soft hum of the villa's central air system echoed through the night. Somewhere down the long marble hallway, a guard shifted in his stance, but inside the guest room of the First Lady's residence, Zina sat wide awake, knees tucked to her chest beneath the blanket. The room smelled faintly of jasmine and wood polish. Her new clothes, soft cotton pajamas, felt too clean, too light. The ceiling above her sparkled with a tiny chandelier. She had never slept under one before, yet she couldn't sleep. Not because she was scared, but because something inside her felt ... misplaced. Like the walls were too perfect for her pain. The silence too heavy for someone used to the noise of buses and shouting market women. She stared at her right arm. The faint mark that looked like a bent leaf, something she always thought was just a scar, caught her attention again. She traced it absent-mindedly, remembering the First Lady's gentle voice. "You're not going to sleep on any street again." In the room across the hall, First Lady Omalera Adebayo lay on the edge of her bed, wide awake. In her hands was the tiny faded beaded bracelet, the one that said hope. She hadn't looked at it in years. Now she held it like it might break, or like she might. Her husband, President Folklore Adebayo, sat beside her silently, one hand rubbing her shoulder. She hadn't spoken in over an hour. "Say something," he whispered gently. "I'm afraid," she replied. "Afraid she isn't yours?" he asked, double quotes, "No." "Afraid that she is," Omalera said, voice tight with emotion. "Afraid of what she's been through. That I let her go, and she paid for it. She's here now," Folklore said. "You found her, but does she know me?" Omalera whispered. "Would she even want me?" The next morning, sunlight spilled into Zina's room like gold dust. She blinked awake slowly, confused at first by the softness of the bed, the stillness of the air. A maid stood near the doorway. With a gentle smile, "Good morning, my dear. Would you like to shower?" Zina nodded hesitantly. The woman led her to a private bathroom, cleaner than any space Zina had ever seen. A fluffy towel and toothbrush waited for her. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her face looked different. The dirt was gone. Her eyes were no longer shadowed with exhaustion, but she still didn't know who that girl was. After breakfast, soft rice and spicy eggs on delicate china, she was led to a sitting room. The First Lady sat alone, dressed in a simple lace wrapper, her headscarf neatly tied. She looked ... soft, not like a politician's wife, like someone's mother. Zina stood nervously by the door. "You called me, Ma?" "Yes, sweetheart. Come sit with me." Zina sat at the edge of the plush sofa, her hands in her lap. Omalera studied her face, her posture, her voice. Then she reached for her hand. "I want to ask you something important." Zina nodded slowly. "Do you remember anything?" "About where you were before the Olanra Wanjus adopted you." Zina shook her head. "No, Ma. They always said I came from an orphanage, that I was left there." Omalera took a shaky breath. "Did they ever tell you your real name?" Zina paused. "No, they called me Zina. But sometimes when I was little, I had dreams of a woman by a river. She was always crying, and sang a name, but it was hard to hear." "What name?" Omalera asked gently. "I don't know. I think it started Withh." Omalera's eyes welled up. "Hope." Zina's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "I named you that," Omalera whispered. "In my heart? When I left you, I whispered it over and over again. Hope, hope, hope." Zina's hands trembled. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. "I was just 17, Omalera continued, her voice cracking. "I was poor, alone. I didn't know what to do. I thought someone else could give you a better life. But I've thought about you every day since. I searched for you, and now you're here." Zina stared at her, frozen. The room felt like it was spinning. "I know this is a lot to take in," Omalera said softly, "but I have proof. There's a birthmark on your arm." Zina slowly rolled up her sleeve, the bent leaf. Omalera rolled up her own. Identical tears fell down Zina's cheeks. Before she could stop them, "You're saying I'm your daughter?" "Yes," Omalera whispered, "and I am your mother." The silence was heavy. broken only by the sound of Zina sobbing. Omalara leaned forward, arms open but hesitant. "Only if you want." Zina threw herself into her arms. They wept together, wrapped around each other, the years of pain and longing finally crumbling into something real. Later that day, the president signed an official order for a private DNA test, not for the media, but for final closure. The results would take 24 hours, but deep in her soul, Omalara already knew the answer. That night, she brought out the bracelet and placed it on Zina's wrist. It was worn, but it fit. Zina stared at it like a sacred relic. She hadn't known her name, her birthday, her story. Now she did. Her name wasn't just Zina. She was Hope, the child who had been lost but was now found. The presidential villa was quiet the next morning, but inside the state-of-the-art medical suite, the air was thick with tension. Zina sat on the edge of a padded chair, her hands in her lap, eyes darting between the nurse and the machine. She didn't understand much about DNA, only that it was supposed to tell you if someone was really your family. Her stomach twisted in knots. A small cotton swab was gently rubbed inside her cheek. She barely felt it. The nurse smiled at her kindly. "You're doing well, my dear." But Zina didn't smile back. She was too scared in the observation room behind the one-way mirror. First Lady Omalara Adebayo stood still as a statue, her fingers clutching the edges of her silk scarf. Beside her, her husband, President Folklore Adebayo, watched the procedure in silence. On the small table next to them sat the swab they had taken from Omalara earlier that morning. It was labeled, simply, Mother, the one from Zina, child. Neither of them spoke, not until the lab technician placed the samples in the machine and turned to inform them the results would be ready by evening. Then Omalara sat down slowly, her hands shaking. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered. "What if she's not mine and I've just pulled this poor girl into a fantasy?" Folklore turned to her gently. "And if you're right?" Omalara swallowed hard. "Then I left my daughter on the street for 13 years. "You searched," he reminded her. "You didn't forget. You didn't replace her. You grieved her every day. That's not abandonment. That's a broken heart." Still, the hours stretched like years. Meanwhile, Zina was taken to a quiet sitting room with soft music playing and a tray of jollof rice in front of her. She tried to eat but couldn't. Her throat felt tight. Every now and then, a maid would peek in and smile. "You okay, my dear?" But she would just nod politely. Her mind was far away. She thought of the street, of the time she had begged for bread and someone threw sand at her. She thought of sleeping behind a kiosk during a rainstorm, her dress soaked and her skin freezing. She remembered the hunger that felt like fire in her belly, and now she was here, in a palace, wearing silk, sleeping in a bed softer than clouds. Was this her life now? Could it really be true? Across the compound, Omalara sat in the garden chapel, hands folded tightly, praying silently. "God, if this is my child, give me the courage to make things right, and if she's not, don't let her feel like a mistake again, not under my roof." By sunset, the call came. Angela, Omalara's aide, knocked lightly and entered the prayer room, her face unreadable. Omalara stood up slowly. "Is it ready?" Angela nodded. "The president is waiting in his office." Omalara followed without speaking. She entered the private office to find Folklore holding a sealed envelope in both hands. For a long moment, he didn't open it. He just looked at her. Then, finally, he tore the seal and pulled out the single sheet. His eyes scanned the page. Then he looked up. "It's her." Omalara blinked. "Zina is Hope. She's your daughter." A 99.9% DNA match. Omalara collapsed into the chair behind her, her whole body trembling. "She's mine. She's yours," he whispered. Tears fell freely, but they were not the kind born of pain. They were born of mercy, of something lost. Finally found that evening, Omalara entered Zina's room slowly. The girl sat near the window, watching the sky grow dark. When she turned and saw the First Lady, she stood quickly. "You don't have to stand," Omalara said, smiling, her eyes still wet. Zina sat, but awkwardly Omalara walked over and sat beside her. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Zina nodded, nervous. "I got the results." Zina's breath hitched. "You're my daughter." The words didn't feel real until Zina saw the tears falling again, and then her own face crumpled. "I am," she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Double quotes, "Yes. You are my hope. I gave birth to you when I was 17. I was afraid. I thought someone else would care for you better, but I've regretted that choice every day since." Zina didn't speak. Her chest rose and fell with sharp, shallow breaths. Omalara reached into her wrapper and pulled out the old bracelet. "I named you this in my heart, Hope. That was the name I whispered when I left you at the orphanage gate." Zina stared at the tiny faded beads. She didn't take it at first. She only looked at it as if it were made of fire. Then, slowly, she reached out. Omalara took her hand and placed the bracelet in her palm. Zina burst into tears. Omalara gathered her close, rocking her gently like she was still a baby. "You are not a mistake. You were never unwanted. You were loved. You are still loved." Zina wept into her chest. They stayed like that until the sky went completely dark. A mother and a daughter wrapped in the kind of love that no time could erase. For the first time in many years, the presidential villa was quiet, for reasons that had nothing to do with politics. It was the quiet of healing, the silence after a storm, the stillness that comes when a soul has finally found its home. Hope, once called Zina, now lived in the guest wing of the First Lady's quarters, but she was no longer treated like a guest. She was family. Each day she explored a little more, not just the palace but herself. The First Lady had enrolled her in private tutoring to catch up on all the years of education she had missed. She was quiet in class, always watching, always listening. But every now and then her smile would break through a soft, shy curve of the lips that made the staff stop in their tracks. It was the smile of a girl who had survived the unthinkable, and still had the strength to hope. In the evenings, she sat with Omalara and listened to stories. Stories of the woman's life before the palace, stories of the mistakes she made, of the things she had lost. And Omalara never hid the truth. She laid it bare, even when it hurt. "I was wrong," she said one night as they sat by the indoor fountain with their feet in warm water. "I left you thinking I was saving you, but I see now that I was saving myself. And you paid the price for it." Hope didn't answer right away. Her hand reached into her lap and fingered the old bracelet, the one that still read hope in faded plastic letters. "You came back," she finally said. "That's what matters to me." That night, Omalara lay in bed beside her husband, staring at the ceiling, tears slipping into her ears. "She forgave me," she whispered. "That girl, that little girl I left behind, she forgave me." President Fullerin turned toward her, smiling gently in the dark. But outside the villa, the world had questions. Rumors had been circulating for days. Why was the First Lady canceling events? Who was the young girl spotted walking beside her in 2 different photos? And why was there sudden movement around the House of Mercy orphanage? Social media lit up with theories. Some guessed it was a child rescued from a trafficking ring. Others believed it was a publicity stunt for a charity launch. A few more cynically speculated that the president's wife had taken in a street girl to soften her image ahead of re-election season, but none of them knew the truth. Not yet. And it was time they did. On a golden morning, just 2 weeks after the DNA confirmation, the office of the First Lady announced a national broadcast, a personal address by Her Excellency. No further details were given. The country buzzed with anticipation. When the cameras rolled that evening, millions of households across Nigeria paused their dinners to listen. Eyes tender, her voice steady. "I speak to you today," she began, "not as a leader's wife, but as a woman, as a mother, and as someone who once made a terrible mistake." Across Lagos, Port Harcourt, Enugu, and Kaduna, people leaned closer to their screens. Inside a shop in Ibadan, a woman dropped her mop. A group of boys paused their game at the junction. In rural villages, families huddled near dusty televisions powered by generators. Omalara continued. "Over 20 years ago, when I was only 17, I gave birth to a child I believed I could not raise. Out of fear and desperation, I left her at the gates of House of Mercy Orphanage and ran away." She paused, breathing deeply. "For years I lived with the pain of that choice, and this year, with my husband's support, I began searching for her, not knowing if she was alive, not knowing if she'd ever forgive me, but by God's mercy, I found her." She turned slightly and extended her hand. Hope stepped into frame slowly, wearing a simple blue dress. "She was once called Zina, but she is the hope I prayed for. The child I once lost, now found." The country held its breath. Hope looked into the camera, her voice soft but sure. "I didn't think I mattered. For a long time, I thought I was just a mistake someone left behind. But today, I know I am not forgotten. I am loved." Tears flowed freely on both sides of the screen, from viewers and from those in the room. Omalara closed the speech by announcing a new foundation, the Hope Initiative, dedicated to helping street children, orphans, and abandoned youth across Nigeria. "No child is too lost to be found," she said. "Every child deserves to know they matter." That night, Hope sat on the balcony with a cup of tea watching. The city lights blinked like stars in the dark. Angela, the ever-kind aide, walked up behind her. "You okay?" Hope nodded. "I think so." Angela smiled. "You know, ... your story will save lives." Hope looked up at the stars. "I hope it does," Angela chuckled. "You're really living up to your name." Hope turned and smiled, a smile full of warmth, healing, and quiet power. She was no longer just a girl from the street. She was a voice, a symbol, a daughter, a survivor, and she had just begun to live. A month after the televised address, Nigeria was still talking about Hope Adebayo, the once nameless girl who had become a household name overnight. Streets echoed with her story, not because of who she was related to, but because of how deeply her silence had resonated. For every market child who had slept under tables, for every orphan who had watched families walk past without choosing them, for every girl who had been thrown away and still dared to survive, Hope had become a mirror, a symbol, and most importantly, a voice. But inside the villa, she remained humble, even hesitant. Adjusting to her new life had been overwhelming. People now stood when she entered a room. Her clothes were chosen by stylists. Her every smile was captured and studied online. But what grounded her the most wasn't the silk sheets or the security guards, it was the smell of Mama Omalara's perfume in the hallway, the soft prayers whispered from the kitchen each morning, and the quiet way the First Lady still tucked her in with a forehead kiss on nights she couldn't sleep. One morning, while she walked through the garden wrapped in her mother's old shawl, she paused near the fountain and whispered, "What do I do with this second chance?" And the answer came, not through a voice, but a memory of the boy who once gave her a torn piece of bread and told her, "Don't die." Of the girls at the orphanage gate who whispered behind the metal fence as she cried. Of the children still sitting on street corners right now waiting to be seen. That afternoon, she told her mother her idea. The First Lady listened carefully, her eyes never leaving Hope's. "I want to go back," Hope said, "to where I came from, to House of Mercy, not just for a visit. I want to meet the others. I want them to know I see them. I want them to know what I didn't know, that they matter." Amalara reached out and took her daughter's hands, tears in her eyes. "Then let's do it together." The following week, Hope returned to the gates that had once stayed shut to her cries. This time, with them wide open, the convoy rolled into House of Mercy under the golden afternoon sun. Children lined up with flowers in hand, unsure what to expect. The press was kept far away. This wasn't a performance. It was a reunion. Hope stepped out first, dressed simply in a pale yellow dress with her signature Hope bracelet shining on her wrist. She walked slowly across the dusty compound, her eyes scanning the crumbling walls, the cracked cement she once knelt on as she begged to be let in. But her heart didn't tremble. It burned with purpose. The matron, the same one who once slammed the window in her face, stood nervously by the gate, wringing her hands. Hope stopped in front of her. The woman opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, but Hope simply said, "I forgive you." And then she smiled. The woman burst into tears. Inside the gathering hall, rows of small children sat waiting. Most of them had no idea who she was. Hope looked at them and saw herself tired eyes, hungry hearts, waiting for someone to say they mattered. She stepped to the front and spoke softly without a microphone. "My name is Hope," she said. "I used to sleep outside this gate. I begged for food, cried in the rain, and thought no one in this world would ever care about me. But I was wrong." She looked down at a little girl with no shoes. "You are not forgotten. You are not trash. You are precious. You are seen, and you are loved." The room fell into sacred silence. Then the children clapped. Some stood up and ran to her, wrapping their small arms around her waist. One whispered, "Will you be our big sister?" Hope knelt and hugged her tightly. "Always." In the months that followed, Hope became the youngest ambassador for child welfare in the country. The Hope Initiative launched free shelters in all 36 states, offering abandoned children food, education, mental health care, and, above all, dignity. She returned to school too, this time in uniform, surrounded by classmates who once would have mocked her but now admired her strength. She studied hard, not because the world was watching, but because she had tasted the pain of ignorance and vowed never to return to it. One day, during a visit to a shelter under a bridge in Onitsha, a journalist asked her, "Do you think you've changed the world?" Hope smiled, not the shy one, but the confident one now born from truth. "No," she said, "but I'm trying to change what the world forgets, that every child has a story and every story deserves to be heard." The video clip went viral. At home, she still called her mother Ma, still giggled when the president tickled her ribs during family dinners, and still requested boiled corn instead of fancy pastries. Fame never changed her heart. It only widened it one night. Omalara walked into Hope's room to find her sleeping with a notebook clutched to her chest. Gently, she opened it. At the top of the page, Hope had written, "One day I will build a house called Mercy, but this time the gate will never close." Omalara wept silently, kissed her daughter's forehead, and turned off the light. Subscribe for more videos. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones screamed from stages, but the ones whispered from mother to child, from street to soul, from brokenness to healing. Hope Adebayo wasn't just a name. She became a movement. A reminder that no matter where you come from, no matter who forgets you, you are not invisible. You are not too lost to be found. You are hope.